The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, upon its arrival in England during the early months of 1943, presented an image of formidable and insurmountable aerial prowess, at least on paper. This aerial behemoth was armed with an impressive array of 8 .50 caliber machine guns, boasted an extraordinary capacity to absorb punishment that would utterly devastate lesser fighter aircraft, and was propelled by a supercharged engine capable of generating in excess of 2,000 horsepower. Consequently, American pilots who first settled into the expansive cockpits of these colossal machines often harbored a profound sense of invincibility. However, they were soon to confront a harsh reality, a brutal lesson that very nearly crippled the 8th Air Force's entire capability for fighter escort. On the 15th of April, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group embarked on their inaugural combat mission over the skies of occupied Europe. Within a mere 20 minutes of breaching the Dutch coastline, they unexpectedly encountered formations of Focke-Wulf 190s. The subsequent events unfolded with a shocking swiftness, leaving all participants utterly bewildered. The German fighters executed maneuvers with such astonishing agility that the P-47s appeared almost stationary in comparison. American pilots, instinctively yanking back on their control columns, desperately attempted to track their adversaries, engaging and turning aerial battles in the time-honored fashion that every fighter pilot had practiced since the Great War. Yet, the Thunderbolts lumbered heavily through the air, their speed hemorrhaging with each attempted turn. Luftwaffe pilots, seizing this critical advantage, mercilessly dismembered the American formations. A devastating 4 P-47s were lost that day, without a single enemy aircraft being accounted for. The underlying issue was not a deficiency in pilot skill or courage. These American aviators had undergone rigorous and extensive training, possessed a deep theoretical understanding of aerial combat, and harbored an intense desire to validate the capabilities of their new aircraft. However, they were operating the P-47 as if it were a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt, nimble and agile fighters that achieved success primarily through their superior maneuverability. The Thunderbolt, in stark contrast, weighed a colossal 12,500 pounds when empty. When fully provisioned with fuel and ammunition, its operational weight surged past 17,500 pounds. This represented an approximate 3-ton weight differential compared to an FW-190, and nearly a 4-ton difference when pitted against a Bf-109. The immutable laws of physics unfortunately remained indifferent to acts of bravery. We hope you are staying with us and will watch the end of this video. We would be incredibly grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment below about where you are from and what your thoughts are on the video's topic. Throughout the months of April and May of 1943, the grim tally of losses continued to escalate. American fighter pilots would identify German formations, initiate turning dogfights, and inevitably either be shot down or watch in utter helplessness as their adversaries simply outturned them with ease and made their escape. While the P-47's roll rate was deemed respectable, its turning radius was undeniably abysmal when compared to its opponents. Pilots frequently reported a sensation akin to flying cumbersome trucks, while their German counterparts seemed to be piloting nimble sports cars. Morale plummeted precipitously within the units. Some aviators even openly voiced concerns, questioning whether the Thunderbolt represented a catastrophic misjudgment, a fundamentally flawed aircraft design that would ultimately lead to their demise. The escalating statistics undeniably corroborated their profound anxieties. Throughout the spring of 1943, P-47 units were achieving an approximate ratio of 1 kill for every 2 losses, an utterly catastrophic exchange rate that was simply unsustainable in the long term. Combat reports meticulously compiled by German pilots during this period vividly illustrate their burgeoning confidence. Luftwaffe veterans frequently characterized their initial encounters with the P-47 as remarkably straightforward victories, primarily because American pilots stubbornly insisted on engaging in the horizontal plane, where the Thunderbolt's immense weight became an insuperable anchor. One FW-190 pilot, in a poignant entry in his diary, even remarked that shooting down Thunderbolts was less challenging than routine training exercises, as they could precisely anticipate the Americans' predictable strategy to attempt a turn and chase. Back at the various air bases scattered across England, maintenance crews bore witness to the mounting toll of these engagements. P-47s frequently returned bearing the scars of battle damage, typically from stern attacks, irrefutable evidence that German fighters were comfortably positioned behind them, while American pilots desperately struggled to maneuver away. The aircraft's exceptional durability, while laudable, paradoxically meant that more pilots survived to recount the humiliating details of their experiences. However, survival devoid of victory was systematically eroding the operational effectiveness of the units. A fundamental change was imperative, and it needed to be implemented with extreme urgency. The 8th Air Force could not endure many more months of fighter groups that were demonstrably incapable of effectively engaging the enemy. The bomber crews undertaking perilous missions deep into German territory desperately required escorts that could not only accompany them, but also actively neutralize Luftwaffe interceptors. Every mission that returned with disheartening accounts of P-47s being outmaneuvered was another mission where German fighters were granted unhindered freedom to decimate formations of B-17s and B-24s. The pressure exerted upon fighter group commanders to resolve this critical issue was immeasurable. The eventual solution, when it finally materialized, would fundamentally overturn every preconceived notion about aerial combat. The pivotal breakthrough emerged from an entirely unexpected quarter, not from the rigid confines of tactical manuals or the directives issued by headquarters, but rather from the astute observations of pilots who began to analyze what transpired when they ceased attempting to engage the enemy in turning maneuvers. Lieutenant Quint Brown, of the 78th Fighter Group, made a peculiar and significant observation during a mission over the Zuider Zee in June 1943. After an unsuccessful turning engagement with Bf-109s, he instinctively pushed his aircraft's nose down in an attempt to escape. To his astonishment, his airspeed rapidly increased, far surpassing that of the Messerschmitts that attempted to pursue him. He successfully recovered from the dive several thousand feet lower, remarkably still alive. This singular incident profoundly altered his perspective, leading him to re-evaluate his 7-ton fighter. The P-47's considerable weight was not merely a detriment. In the precise language of physics, that massive airframe possessed a unique capacity to store kinetic energy differently than lighter fighter aircraft. When executing a dive, the Thunderbolt converted its potential energy derived from altitude into kinetic energy, manifested as speed, with astonishing efficiency. That colossal 17,500-pound mass, which rendered turning so sluggish, transformed into an immense advantage during vertical maneuvers. The aircraft demonstrated an unparalleled ability to accelerate in a dive, outstripping anything the Luftwaffe possessed. The terminal velocity for a P-47 in a controlled dive comfortably exceeded 550 meters, whereas FW-190s and BF-109s typically began to experience control flutter and structural stress at speeds above 470 mt. This was not a minor advantage. It represented a fundamental physical superiority that effectively nullified every turning disadvantage the Thunderbolt had previously suffered. Several pilots independently arrived at the same conclusion. They could consistently outrun German fighters in dives. However, bridging the gap between this observation and the formulation of effective offensive tactics required considerable time and intellectual effort. The traditional mindset of dogfighting was deeply ingrained. Fighter combat had historically been defined by turning, circling, and relentlessly striving to gain and maintain a position on an opponent's tail. The act of diving away often felt synonymous with retreat, even cowardice. It demanded a particular kind of analytical mind to recognize that speed itself could be weaponized, that remaining engaged in a turning fight was unnecessary if one could dictate the terms of engagement through superior vertical maneuvers. While energy tactics were not entirely unknown and some experienced pilots grasped the concept of exchanging altitude for speed, applying this principle as a primary doctrine for heavy fighters was nothing short of revolutionary. The P-47 Thunderbolt, an aircraft that would redefine aerial combat, possessed an engine of unparalleled power for its time, the Pratt & Whitney R2800. This formidable power plant reached its peak performance at extraordinary altitudes, typically between 25,000 and 30,000 feet. From such commanding heights, a Thunderbolt pilot could initiate a breathtaking dive onto unsuspecting enemy formations, rapidly accumulating immense speed. This kinetic energy was then masterfully exploited to execute devastating slashing attacks before the aircraft zoomed back skyward, converting its speed once more into altitude. German aircraft, hampered by engines that faltered at higher elevations, and lighter airframes incapable of enduring the P-47's furious dive acceleration, simply could not counter this tactic effectively. They were left vulnerable, unable to pursue or escape the relentless assaults. While stateside test pilots meticulously documented the P-47's exceptional dive capabilities during trials, these crucial reports were largely overlooked. The prevailing Army-Air Force fighter doctrine of 1942 placed an overwhelming emphasis on maneuverability, leading commanders to focus almost exclusively on turn performance. Although the original specifications for the P-47 prioritized heavy armament and robust durability for bomber escort missions, the tactical employment of fighters still clung to traditional dogfighting patterns. The revolutionary idea that a fighter could achieve success by deliberately avoiding turning engagements altogether had not been seriously considered by those in positions of authority. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. By the middle of 1943, a clear and recurring pattern began to emerge from the informal discussions among P-47 pilots. The pilots who consistently survived multiple missions and avoided losses were those who had, either by accident or design, abstained from lengthy turning engagements. Their method was consistent, ascend to a high altitude, execute swift, high-speed dives, deliver rapid attacks, and then zoom away to safety. They perceived altitude as a precious financial asset, spending it judiciously to gain speed, and subsequently reinvesting that speed back into altitude through powerful zoom climbs. Conversely, those pilots who persisted in attempting to engage in traditional turning dogfights frequently met their demise or returned from missions without any confirmed kills. The sheer weight that rendered the P-47 somewhat cumbersome in tight turns simultaneously bestowed upon it an incredible resilience. This 7-ton behemoth could slice through turbulence that would violently buffet and destabilize lighter aircraft. Furthermore, this substantial mass provided unparalleled stability during high-speed dives. Pilots could maintain a rock-steady gun sight on their targets while hurtling downwards at velocities that would force German pilots to desperately wrestle with their control columns just to prevent their aircraft from disintegrating. The very same aircraft that felt sluggish and unresponsive during maneuvering became an incredibly precise and stable gun platform when executing a dive. Grasping this critical distinction, understanding precisely when the aircraft's weight was an advantage and when it was a hindrance, was the key differentiator between those pilots who would fundamentally transform fighter tactics and those who would continue to struggle with outdated methodologies. Colonel Hubert Zemke assumed command of the 56th Fighter Group in August 1943, bringing with him a formidable reputation for analytical thinking that bordered on obsessive dedication. Zemke harbored no interest in personal glory or romanticized notions of aerial combat. Instead, he approached loss reports with the meticulous scrutiny of an accountant examining unprofitable investments, and what he discovered was deeply disturbing. His group was suffering a devastating hemorrhage of experienced pilots, all while achieving only mediocre kill ratios. The stark numbers painted a narrative that directly contradicted every tenet of fighter tactics taught by the Army Air Force. Zemke, with unwavering conviction, determined that numbers did not lie. He commenced his investigation by personally interviewing every pilot who had survived encounters with the Luftwaffe. He bypassed the official after-action reports, which were often sanitized and formal, opting instead for brutal, candid conversations about the true realities of combat. The pattern quickly solidified. Pilots who ascended to high altitudes before engagement and initiated attacks with steep dives exhibited superior survival rates and achieved more kills. Conversely, pilots who allowed themselves to be drawn into horizontal turning fights either perished or returned empty-handed. Armed with this irrefutable data, Zemke consulted his operations officer and made a decision so audacious it could have resulted in a court-martial had it failed. He completely discarded the standard fighter tactics manual. The new doctrine he implemented was simple yet utterly radical. Never engage in a turn fight with the enemy. The 56th Fighter Group would ascend to 30,000 feet before entering combat zones, strategically positioning themselves above German formations, and then attack exclusively through high-speed dives. Pilots would discharge their weapons during these dives, blast through the enemy formation, utilize their accumulated speed to zoom climb back to altitude, and then repeat the process. If a German fighter attempted to follow them skyward, the P-47's superior high-altitude performance would allow them to effortlessly extend away. If Germans dared to pursue them downwards, the Thunderbolt's unmatched dive speed would rapidly widen the gap. The enemy's only recourse was to watch in helpless frustration as American fighters repeatedly tore through their formations. Zemke encountered immediate and significant resistance from his own pilots. Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling, one of his squadron commanders, vehemently argued that this new approach was cowardly. He maintained that true fighter pilots stood their ground and fought, rather than executing hit-and-run attacks like opportunistic bandits. Zemke's retort became legendary within the 56th Fighter Group. Dead heroes don't win wars. Live pilots who kill the enemy do. He made it unequivocally clear that any pilot who defied the new doctrine and engaged in turning fights would face severe disciplinary action. Survival and victory held paramount importance, far outweighing any romanticized notions of chivalrous combat. The inaugural mission employing Zemke's revolutionary tactics occurred on October 8, 1943, targeting the German city of Bremen. The 56th Fighter Group ascended to a formidable 32,000 feet and patiently awaited their moment. When Luftwaffe fighters rose to intercept the bomber stream, Zemke personally led his group down in a perfectly coordinated dive. They achieved speeds of 450 km/h before even reaching the German formation. The P-47s tore through the Bf-109s with the destructive force of cannonballs ripping through paper. German pilots scattered in every direction, their formation cohesion instantly shattered. The Americans then zoomed back up, reformed at altitude, and initiated another devastating dive approximately 15 minutes later. That day, the 56th Fighter Group proudly claimed 8 kills without suffering a single loss. The numbers, finally, were decisively in America's favor. News of this extraordinary success spread like wildfire. Other pilots within the group, who had initially been skeptical, suddenly became fervent believers after surviving their first dive attack mission. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. For the first time since their arrival in Europe, American pilots felt a profound sense of control over the engagements. They were no longer merely reacting to German maneuvers. They were actively forcing the Germans to react to them. This crucial shift in initiative proved enormously significant for both morale and overall effectiveness. Zemke meticulously refined the doctrine throughout October and November. He established stringent altitude requirements, never engage below 25,000 feet, if at all possible. He developed precise communication protocols to enable flights to coordinate their dives, striking enemy formations simultaneously from multiple angles. He placed a strong emphasis on fire discipline. Pilots were instructed to deliver one precise, effective burst during each diving pass, allowing for perhaps 3 seconds of trigger time. The spray and pray approach was utterly ineffective at 450 mph. The imperative was to aim, fire, and trust the devastating power of their 50-caliber machine guns to accomplish the task. The objective was not prolonged engagement. It was the delivery of maximum violence in the shortest possible time, followed by disengagement before the enemy could mount an effective response. This was industrial-era warfare, meticulously applied to the skies, efficient, brutal, and unequivocally effective. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. I am from your country region, and I think the video topic highlights a crucial aspect of military history: how innovation in tactics, often driven by empirical observation rather than established doctrine, can fundamentally alter the course of conflict and save lives. It's a fascinating example of adapting to technology and circumstance. The effectiveness of the P-47 Thunderbolt in aerial combat was indisputable, demanding a level of precision from its pilots that elevated them to tactical engineers in the midst of battle. This formidable dive attack typically commenced from a commanding altitude, often between 28,000 and 32,000 feet, where the P-47 pilots meticulously scanned the vast expanse below for telltale signs of German aircraft formations. The initial detection of the adversary was paramount, relying on subtle visual cues, such as the distinctive white contrails etched across the frigid, high-altitude sky by enemy engines, or the stark dark silhouettes of German fighters starkly contrasted against the backdrop of clouds or the terrestrial landscape far beneath. Upon successful identification of the enemy, the intricate dance of attack geometry would unfold. The P-47 pilot would skillfully maneuver to position his aircraft several thousand feet above the target formation, crucially aiming to secure an up-sun advantage. The strategic importance of the sun's position was immense. German pilots, peering upwards towards an incoming Thunderbolt, would be momentarily blinded by the glare if the American fighter descended from the sun's direction. This was no mere stroke of fortune, but a meticulously calculated positioning that often necessitated several minutes of careful maneuvering before the actual commitment to the dive. Throughout this preparatory phase, flight leaders maintained constant communication, ensuring that all 4 aircraft within a flight were perfectly aligned and coordinated before initiating the decisive descent. The actual dive commenced with a relatively shallow angle, perhaps around 30 degrees nose down, simultaneously with the pilot advancing the throttle to its maximum setting. The P-47, known for its robust construction, would accelerate with astonishing rapidity, with airspeed becoming the singularly dominant factor. Pilots intently monitored their airspeed indicators as the needle surged upwards 300 mph, then 300 twice, quickly reaching 400 mph. At approximately 400 mph, the pilot would dramatically steepen the dive to an angle of 45 or even 50 degrees. The airframe would shudder violently as the aircraft approached speeds that would undoubtedly instill terror in pilots of lighter, less robust fighters. Control surfaces became noticeably stiff, demanding considerable physical strength and exertion to manipulate the control column. It was precisely in these extreme conditions that the P-47's substantial weight proved to be an invaluable asset. Its sheer mass effectively damped out turbulent air currents, maintaining the aircraft's stability and composure, even as its velocity soared towards an exhilarating 450 or 480 mph. Before we delve deeper into the intricacies of this fascinating aerial warfare, please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be profoundly grateful for your like and subscription. We also invite you to share a comment about where you are from and what you think about the compelling topic presented in this video. The distinction between a successful, impactful attack and one that merely expended precious ammunition lay in impeccable gunsight discipline. At the blistering speeds attained during the dive, the pilot was afforded a mere 2 or 3 seconds of truly effective firing time. The gunsight picture itself was a fleeting, dynamic tableau. A target would materialize, rapidly expand in size, and then instantly flash past. Pilots painstakingly trained to initiate firing at approximately 400 yards, maintaining a continuous trigger pull as they rapidly closed the distance to 200 yards. The Thunderbolt's formidable armament of 8 50 caliber machine guns, 4 precisely mounted in each wing, generated a devastating cone of fire. This lethal cone converged at a predetermined point where the guns were harmonized, typically calibrated for a range of 300 yards. At this optimal range, even a brief 1-second burst could unleash an astonishing 40 to 50 rounds into the target area. These armor-piercing incendiary rounds possessed the destructive capability to tear through aluminum plating, ignite fuel tanks, shatter vital engine components, or fatally wound enemy pilots. The moment immediately following the discharge of ammunition represented the most critical juncture of the entire maneuver. Less experienced pilots might succumb to the temptation of attempting to track their target, eager to confirm hits. Such a lapse in discipline, however, was frequently fatal. The established dive attack doctrine unequivocally demanded an immediate and unwavering commitment to the through pass. The pilot maintained a nose-down attitude, sustained or even increased speed, and blasted comprehensively through the entire enemy formation. German fighters positioned above and alongside the targeted aircraft would be frantically turning, attempting to engage, but the P-47 would already be well past them, diving away at velocities they simply could not match. This inherent brilliance was the maneuver's core genius. The attacking pilot's vulnerability was compressed into a minuscule window of approximately 3 seconds, spanning the interval between entering effective firing range and decisively punching through the lower boundary of the enemy formation. Once the P-47 had successfully cleared the enemy formation and descended below it, the pilot would commence the crucial recovery phase. Pulling out of a dive at speeds of 450 mph required an exceptionally refined technique. An abrupt or excessively forceful pull on the control column carried the severe risk of overstressing the aircraft's airframe, or, even more perilously, inducing a blackout in the pilot due to extreme G-forces. The correct recovery procedure involved a smooth yet firm application of force to gradually bring the aircraft's nose upwards. The P-47's renowned rugged construction allowed it to tolerate recovery G-loads that would have undoubtedly ripped the wings off lighter aircraft, though pilots still exercised utmost respect for the structural limits. As the nose ascended and passed through the horizon, all the immense kinetic energy accumulated during the dive was efficiently converted back into potential energy, manifesting as regained altitude. The Thunderbolt would execute a powerful zoom climb, often regaining an impressive 5,000 or 6,000 feet purely from the momentum of its preceding dive. This zoom climb was precisely where the P-47's engine power at high altitude truly paid dividends. The formidable R-2800 engine, equipped with its advanced turbo-supercharger system, continued to produce substantial power even as the aircraft rapidly ascended back towards 30,000 feet. In stark contrast, German fighters attempting to pursue would find their engines struggling and gasping in the thin air, rapidly losing power, thereby forcing them to level off or descend. The P-47, however, would relentlessly continue its climb. Within a matter of minutes, the pilot would be back at optimal attack altitude, reforming with his flight and preparing for yet another devastating diving pass. This relentless cycle of attack and recovery was systematically repeated. While German pilots had certainly encountered highly skilled adversaries before, notably the RAF Spitfire pilots over Britain or the tenacious Soviet airmen during the Battle of Stalingrad, the P-47 dive attacks introduced an entirely different dimension to aerial combat. Luftwaffe veterans frequently characterized these assaults as a form of psychological warfare, delivered with terrifying precision at speeds of 450 mph. The pervasive fear was not merely the immediate threat of being shot down, it was the profound and demoralizing sense of utter helplessness. When Thunderbolts plunged through their formations, German pilots found themselves utterly unable to mount an effective defense. Their only viable recourse was to frantically scatter and desperately hope for individual survival. A vivid illustration of this destructive tactic comes from Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, a Bf 109 pilot serving with Jagdgeschwader 27. In his mission diary from November 1943, Stigler recounted a harrowing encounter with the American 56th Fighter Group. His Staffel, a tightly disciplined formation of 9 aircraft, was in the process of climbing to intercept incoming B-17 bombers when American fighters suddenly appeared high above them. Stigler vividly described witnessing dark, ominous shapes detaching from the high cover, followed by the terrifying, almost instantaneous acceleration as the P-47s plunged downwards. His formation commander frantically attempted to call out evasive maneuvers, but radio discipline instantly disintegrated. Each pilot, driven by pure, primal survival instinct, broke in a different direction, completely overriding their rigorous training. The Thunderbolts sliced through their formation in mere seconds, and Stigler watched in horror as 2 of his squadron mates plummeted earthward, trailing plumes of smoke. Crucially, the Americans did not linger to engage in dogfighting. They were already rapidly climbing away before the disoriented Germans could even begin to regroup. This precise pattern of attack and its devastating consequences was consistently replicated across every major air battle from late 1943 onwards. Luftwaffe tactical reports from the period consistently highlight a recurring theme. American fighters launching attacks from high altitude invariably triggered an immediate and catastrophic breakdown of German formation integrity. Squadron cohesion was, in fact, everything in the intricate calculus of air combat. Fighters operating in coordinated groups could effectively provide mutual cover, concentrate their formidable firepower, and execute complex, synergistic maneuvers. However, when P-47s descended screaming through the skies at speeds that German aircraft simply could not match, that vital cohesion evaporated instantly. Each pilot became terrifyingly isolated, consumed by the immediate concern for his own survival, and fundamentally unable to trust that his wingman was still present and providing cover. The psychological ramifications of the new American air combat doctrine stretched far beyond the immediate shock of individual engagements. German fighter pilots, once focused intently on intercepting bomber formations, found their attention increasingly drawn skyward, constantly scanning for threats from above rather than actively seeking out their primary targets. This fundamental shift in focus compelled German formation leaders to position their units at significantly higher altitudes, a maneuver that demanded the expenditure of precious fuel solely to gain a defensive advantage against the relentless descending attacks. However, this ascent to greater heights carried severe operational penalties. It drastically reduced the time available for combat patrols, curtailed their endurance over critical target areas, and forced their engines to labor inefficiently in the thin, rarefied air, a domain where the P-47's advanced turbo-supercharger system provided American aircraft with a decisive performance edge. The Luftwaffe thus found itself trapped in an agonizing dilemma, facing an impossible strategic choice: either remain at lower altitudes and endure extreme vulnerability to the devastating dive attacks, or climb higher and irrevocably compromise their overall combat effectiveness. Within the Luftwaffe's rigid command structure, there ensued a strenuous and largely unsuccessful struggle to formulate viable counter-tactics. Some units experimented with a bifurcated approach, dividing their forces into two distinct elements, one positioned high to directly engage the menacing P-47s, and another maintained at a lower altitude with the intention of striking the bomber streams. This fragmented strategy, however, proved woefully ineffective. American pilots, demonstrating keen tactical awareness, would simply exploit this division by plunging decisively upon whichever German element was at the lower altitude, scattering its cohesion and disrupting its attack, before rapidly zooming back upwards to safety, well beyond the reach of the higher-positioned German element. Other German units, in a desperate attempt to mitigate the threat, tried to consolidate their formations, flying in tighter, more compact clusters, under the mistaken belief that this would render dive attacks too perilous for the Americans. This defensive posture, ironically, only exacerbated their vulnerability to the P-47's formidable and concentrated firepower. The potent 50 caliber machine guns, indifferent to the proximity of targets, simply found that closer formations equated to a higher probability of multiple hits with each devastating burst. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The most profound psychological consequence stemming from these new tactics was an overwhelming sense of unpredictability. Traditional aerial dogfighting, with its intricate maneuvers and countermaneuvers, possessed a discernible rhythm and flow, allowing experienced pilots to anticipate their opponents' moves, react, and formulate counter-reactions. P-47 dive attacks, however, shattered this established rhythm entirely. German pilots were plunged into a constant state of uncertainty, never knowing precisely when an assault would materialize, from which unexpected angle it would descend, or indeed how many enemy aircraft would participate in the onslaught. Sometimes a solitary Thunderbolt would execute a lightning-fast dive through their ranks. At other times, an entire squadron would descend in a relentless, sequential barrage, one after another, denying the German formations any precious moments to regroup or re-establish their defensive integrity between attacks. This pervasive and relentless unpredictability fostered an environment of unremitting stress, systematically eroding the mental resilience of even the most seasoned and battle-hardened aviators. Major Heinz Baer, a distinguished Luftwaffe ace, credited with an astonishing record of over 200 aerial victories, provided a starkly honest assessment during an interview with German military intelligence in January 1944. He openly conceded that the American dive tactics were virtually impossible to counter effectively with the aircraft currently at their disposal. Baer observed that any attempt to climb in pursuit of the P-47s proved utterly futile, while the alternative of diving away meant the unacceptable abandonment of the bomber formations they were tasked with intercepting. His conclusion was brutally forthright. We must shoot them before they reach altitude, or accept that we cannot engage them on favorable terms. This candid admission, emanating from one of Germany's most celebrated and capable fighter pilots, unequivocally revealed the profound and irreversible shift that had occurred in the tactical equation of aerial combat. The statistical evidence painted an undeniable picture, compelling even the most skeptical observers to acknowledge the dramatic change. Prior to Hub Zemke's strategic implementation of dive attack tactics in August 1943, the 56th Fighter Group, kill-to-loss ratio languished at a modest 1.21, indicating they were barely maintaining parity in their engagements. By December 1943, however, after merely 4 months operating under the tenets of this innovative doctrine, that crucial ratio had surged dramatically to an impressive 4.7:1. The 56th was now systematically destroying German fighters at a rate nearly 5 times greater than their own aircraft losses. This represented far more than a marginal improvement. It signaled a complete and transformative overhaul of their combat effectiveness. January 1944 brought forth even more striking and dramatic results. During the pivotal Big Week in February, a coordinated series of massive bomber raids targeting vital German aircraft production facilities, the 56th Fighter Group recorded an astounding 82 aerial victories within a mere 7 days, while suffering the loss of only 11 of their own aircraft. Major Gerald Johnson, an individual pilot within the group, personally accounted for 7 German fighters during this intense period, achieving each of these successes exclusively through the high-altitude dive attack methodology. His combat reports from this time consistently described each engagement with almost formulaic precision. Climb high, spot enemy formation, dive through at maximum speed, zoom back to altitude, repeat. No prolonged dogfights, no turning contests. Just brutal efficiency. A comparative analysis with other P-47 groups unequivocally underscored the doctrine. The immense value. The 78th Fighter Group, for instance, initially resisted Zemke's innovative tactics, stubbornly adhering to traditional dogfighting engagements. Consequently, in January 1944, they endured 23 aircraft losses, while managing to claim only 14 enemy kills. Their kill-to-loss ratio was inverted, signifying that they were losing almost 2 aircraft for every German fighter they managed to shoot down. By March, however, after the 78th, Commander made a reconnaissance visit to the 56th to observe their successful methods firsthand, and subsequently implemented similar tactics. Their ratio dramatically improved to 3.1:1. This profound shift in tactical doctrine alone, despite flying the identical P-47 aircraft, resulted in a more than 3-fold increase in their operational effectiveness. Individual pilot statistics further reinforced this compelling pattern of success. Robert Johnson, flying with the 56th Fighter Group under the rigorous application of Zemke's doctrine, achieved an astonishing 27 confirmed kills by May 1944, all without ever being shot down himself. His remarkable secret was not inherently superior flying skill. Indeed, many other pilots possessed comparable talent and aptitude. Instead, his decisive advantage lay in his unwavering, almost ruthless adherence to the core principles of dive attack. Johnson's mission reports are notable for their almost mechanical consistency. Altitude advantage maintained throughout combat, high-speed diving passes only, no pursuit of targets into low-altitude turning fights, immediate zoom climb after every attack. He approached aerial combat as a systematic, repeatable industrial process, and the extraordinary results he achieved served as irrefutable proof of its efficacy. The 8th Air Force Headquarters meticulously collected comprehensive data across all fighter groups throughout 1944. The findings consistently revealed that groups which adopted high-altitude dive tactics demonstrated sustained and significant improvement in their combat performance. For example, the 4th Fighter Group, operating P-47s from March through September 1944, recorded an impressive 141 kills against only 23 losses utilizing these methods, yielding an outstanding 6.1:1 ratio. The 300th Fighter Group, formed later and thoroughly indoctrinated in dive tactics from its very inception, achieved an even more remarkable 7.2:1 ratio. These compelling statistics were neither mere accidents nor isolated statistical anomalies. The tactical doctrine was unequivocally effective, and it worked with spectacular success. Confirmation of this tactical shift also emerged from the opposing side through German loss records. Luftwaffe quartermaster reports from mid-1944 distinctly indicated that fighter losses over Germany surged by a staggering 73% between January and June, even though the total number of German fighters in operation had not substantially decreased. This alarming trend meant that the Germans were losing aircraft at a rate far exceeding their capacity for replacement. Furthermore, captured Luftwaffe pilots consistently identified American dive attacks as a primary and devastating cause of these escalating losses. One particularly poignant interrogation report from a German pilot shot down in April 1944 starkly illustrated this impact, stating that his entire group had been rendered completely combat ineffective after suffering the loss of 12 aircraft in a mere 3 days, all directly attributable to the relentless diving assaults of P-47s. In the 3 days leading up to the widespread adoption of diving P-47 tactics, a profound shift began to unfold within aerial combat. The triumph of this tactical revolution transcended mere tallies of enemy aircraft destroyed. Its most significant impact was the dramatic reduction in bomber casualties, once P-47 groups honed their mastery of dive attacks. Historically, the 8th Air Force faced an agonizing dilemma in early 1943, frequently enduring losses of 5 to 7% of its bomber force per mission. Such unsustainable attrition rates threatened to prematurely halt the entire daylight bombing campaign. However, by the summer of 1944, thanks to the implementation of highly effective fighter escort employing these refined tactics, bomber losses plummeted to a mere 1–2% per mission. This transformation signified that the P-47 groups were not simply enduring the rigors of combat, they were decisively fulfilling their paramount objective of safeguarding the valuable bomber formations. This newfound offensive prowess rendered German fighter formations unable to maintain their cohesion or execute coordinated interceptions against the bombers once they were scattered by the P-47's swift diving assaults. The very arithmetic of attrition had been irrevocably reversed. Instead of American forces suffering crippling losses, it was now Germany that was hemorrhaging both vital aircraft and irreplaceable experienced pilots, at a pace so alarming that it was destined to cripple the Luftwaffe's defensive capabilities long before the close of 1944. This strategic reversal marked a pivotal moment in the air war, shifting the balance of power decisively. Remarkably, this critical tactical revolution did not emanate from official directives, nor was it meticulously outlined in revised training manuals issued by High Command Headquarters. Instead, its propagation was far more organic, spreading through candid bar conversations among weary airmen during the brief lulls between perilous missions, and in the often brutal, unvarnished post-combat debriefings where surviving pilots shared the raw, visceral lessons of what genuinely proved effective in the crucible of battle. By January 1944, the undeniable success of the 56th Fighter Group had become common knowledge among every P-47 group within the 8th Air Force. While some commanders eagerly embraced these innovative methods without hesitation, others initially resisted, clinging to conventional wisdom until their escalating loss rates provided an undeniable and grim impetus for change. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Also, feel free to share a comment about where you are from and what you think about this crucial topic in military aviation history. In February 1944, Colonel Don Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, undertook a pivotal visit to Zemek's operations room. Blakesley, a distinguished veteran who had even flown with the Royal Air Force before America's entry into the war, was known for his deeply entrenched and strong opinions regarding air combat. He dedicated 2 intensive days to observing the 56th's meticulous mission planning, absorbing their detailed briefings, and thoroughly scrutinizing their engagement protocols. What ultimately swayed his conviction was not abstract theory or persuasive rhetoric. It was the stark, irrefutable evidence displayed on the mission board, showcasing 56th pilots with an astounding 10, 15, or even 20 confirmed kills, yet still very much alive. In stark contrast, pilots who persisted with older, less effective tactics were regrettably dead. Blakesley returned to his group a changed man, implementing the dive attack doctrine within an astonishingly swift week. The 352nd Fighter Group, activated in July 1943, enjoyed a distinct advantage. They had the opportunity to absorb these revolutionary tactics before developing ingrained, detrimental habits. Their astute commander, Colonel Joe Mason, maintained regular correspondence with Zemke, ensuring that the principles of dive attack were seamlessly integrated into the group's initial training curriculum. New pilots arriving in England were immediately indoctrinated with the fundamental tenets: altitude is life, speed is weapon, never turn with the enemy. The 352nd's very first combat mission in September 1943 was executed using pure dive attack tactics, and their efficacy was undeniable, achieving an impressive 5.1 kill ratio within their inaugural month of combat. This resounding success unequivocally demonstrated that the doctrine worked even with relatively inexperienced pilots, provided they rigorously adhered to its core principles. These combat tactics were not static. They underwent a continuous process of evolution, refined through the crucible of practical experience. Pilots soon discovered that diving through enemy formations became even more devastatingly effective when multiple flights coordinated their assaults. The 56th Fighter Group, ever at the forefront of innovation, pioneered a sophisticated ladder technique. This involved 4 ship flights strategically stacked at varying altitudes, one positioned at 32,000 feet, another at 30,000 feet, and a third at 28,000 feet. They would then dive in a precise sequence, approximately 15 seconds apart, affording German pilots virtually no opportunity to reform their shattered formations between successive attacks. The initial flight would scatter the enemy, the second would intercept Germans attempting to regroup, and the third would then target the disoriented survivors. This relentless rolling attack could sustain intense pressure for several minutes, utterly obliterating the enemy unit's cohesion and combat effectiveness. Amidst this tactical development, radio discipline emerged as an absolutely crucial element. Early dive attacks frequently suffered from debilitating communication breakdowns, as pilots frantically screaming, "Brake right," or "Bogey at 6th hour," saturated the radio waves with a torrent of often useless chatter. Recognizing this critical flaw, Zemke instituted stringent protocols. Only flight leaders were permitted to call the initial dive. Thereafter, strict radio silence was enforced, except for alerts concerning critical threats, or confirmations of kills. This disciplined approach fostered a profound trust among wingmen, enabling them to follow through with the attack, without the need for constant verbal communication. Crucially, this discipline dramatically improved overall situational awareness, as pilots could then clearly hear genuinely important calls instead of sifting through a cacophony of extraneous noise. The doctrine itself proved remarkably adaptable as the air war continued to evolve. By the spring of 1944, the Luftwaffe had begun to strategically avoid direct combat with high-flying P-47 formations, instead choosing to focus their attacks on bombers, when American fighters were either running low on fuel or found themselves out of optimal defensive position. P-47 groups swiftly responded to this new threat by splitting their formations. One section would maintain a high patrol, actively searching for German fighters, while another section flew in closer proximity to the bombers, providing immediate, dedicated escort. Should German aircraft attempt to attack the bombers, the high section would then execute a decisive dive upon them. This inherent flexibility underscored the doctrine's maturity. It was not a rigid, unyielding procedure, but rather a set of adaptable, living principles. By mid-1944, the training of new replacement pilots became a highly systematized process. Fresh pilots arriving from the United States received immediate, intensive indoctrination in the nuances of dive attack tactics. Experienced, combat-hardened pilots took them aloft for practice missions, meticulously demonstrating proper diving techniques, powerful zoom climbs, and impeccable formation discipline. The newcomers flew their initial combat missions as wingmen to these veterans, learning invaluable lessons through direct observation before attempting attacks themselves. This mentorship approach proved incredibly effective, significantly reducing the loss rates among new pilots. For instance, the 56th Fighter Group's replacement pilot loss rate plummeted from a staggering 40% in early 1943 to an astonishing 1 to 2% by late 1944, a testament to the efficacy of this structured training. The influence of these tactics extended beyond the P-47. Other aircraft types adopted modified versions of the principles. P-51 Mustangs, which began arriving in significant numbers by the spring of 1944, utilized similar dive attack tenets, albeit with different execution methods tailored to their lighter weight and superior turning ability. Similarly, P-38 Lightnings operating in the 15th Air Force over Italy implemented dive tactics that ingeniously exploited their inherent twin-engine power advantages. The fundamental principle, encapsulating the essence of air combat: use your aircraft's strengths, avoid its weaknesses, dictate engagement terms through altitude and speed, proved to be universally applicable across all fighter types. The P-47's groundbreaking dive attack doctrine did not simply fade into history with the conclusion of World War II. Instead, it fundamentally reshaped how air forces conceived of fighter employment, particularly emphasizing the critical relationship between an aircraft's intrinsic characteristics and its corresponding tactical doctrine. The profound lesson gleaned from this experience was unequivocally clear. Designing aircraft and developing tactics as separate, disconnected processes inevitably led to calamitous outcomes, as vividly demonstrated by the early struggles of the P-47. True success in aerial warfare necessitated a harmonious and integrated matching of tactical employment with the aircraft's inherent physical capabilities, even if that meant courageously abandoning long-established traditional combat methods. During the Korean War, American fighter pilots operating F-86 Sabres against the formidable MiG-15s inadvertently rediscovered crucial aerial combat strategies. Initially, these pilots independently developed tactics that mirrored the successful principles previously employed by P-47 Thunderbolt aviators in World War II. The F-86 Sabre, a heavier aircraft, exhibited slower turning capabilities at lower velocities compared to its Soviet counterpart, the MiG-15. However, it demonstrated clear superiority in rapid high-speed dives and impressive zoom climbs, effectively exploiting its inherent strengths. Pilots who attempted to engage the more agile MiGs in close quarters, turning battles, often met the same unfortunate end as their predecessors, flying P-47s against the nimble FW-190s. Conversely, those aviators who delved into the comprehensive after-action reports from World War II quickly discerned a recurring and effective tactical blueprint: ascend to a commanding altitude, execute swift, decisive diving attacks, deliver powerful slashing blows, and then rapidly disengage by converting speed back into altitude. This mastery of energy management propelled the F-86's kill ratio against the MiG-15s to an astonishing 10:1. This remarkable success was not solely attributable to the Sabre being an inherently superior aircraft across all performance metrics, but rather stemmed from the profound understanding and application of energy management by American pilots, contrasting sharply with many Soviet and Chinese pilots, who predominantly adhered to the more conventional, but often disadvantageous, strategy of turn fighting. In the 1960s, Colonel John Boyd profoundly transformed the landscape of fighter aviation tactics by systematically formalizing these previously observed combat principles into a comprehensive framework known as energy maneuverability theory. Boyd's groundbreaking research and development efforts, conducted during his tenure at the Fighter Weapons School, culminated in the creation of sophisticated mathematical models. These models provided an unprecedented capability to meticulously compare and contrast aircraft performance characteristics across a wide spectrum of distinct flight regimes, offering a scientific basis for tactical decisions. Central to his theoretical contributions was the celebrated OODA loop concept, an acronym representing observe, orient, decide, act. This conceptual model elucidated how fighter pilots could achieve decisive victory not merely through superior raw maneuverability, but by skillfully manipulating the tempo and flow of an engagement. Boyd's extensive and meticulous study of World War II aerial combat provided rich empirical data with the missions of Hub Zemke's renowned 56th Fighter Group, frequently featuring as pivotal examples in his detailed case studies. Indeed, the remarkable metamorphosis of the P-47 Thunderbolt, evolving from an initial perceived liability into a truly dominant fighter aircraft, served as a quintessential illustration of Boyd's overarching thesis that adaptive tactical flexibility and astute pilot decision-making held greater sway in determining combat outcomes than the immutable specifications or inherent design characteristics of the aircraft platform itself. We invite you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this insightful video. Your support through a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Please also consider sharing your thoughts in the comments section below, letting us know where you are watching from and what your perspective is on the fascinating topic discussed. The iconic F-4 Phantom, deployed during the Vietnam War, initially encountered significant operational challenges stemming from a fundamental doctrinal mismatch, uncannily similar to the difficulties that beset early P-47 operations. Conceived and designed primarily as a sophisticated missile-armed interceptor, The Phantom was intended for long-range engagements. However, the realities of aerial combat over North Vietnam frequently degenerated into chaotic, close-quarters dogfights, scenarios for which the F-4's considerable size and substantial weight proved to be distinct disadvantages, severely impeding its maneuverability. Consequently, the initial loss rates experienced by Phantom squadrons were deemed unacceptable and alarming. A pivotal turning point arrived with the establishment of the Navy Fighter Weapons School, famously known as Top Gun. This elite institution began to impart a rigorous curriculum centered on energy tactics, directly adapted and refined from the hard-won lessons of World War II and the Korean War. Phantom aircrews were meticulously trained to leverage their aircraft's formidable thrust advantage and superior dive performance, consciously avoiding attempts to engage in turning contests with the significantly lighter and more agile MiG-17s and MiG-21s. This transformative shift in tactical application led to a dramatic improvement in kill ratios. The very same aircraft, when operated with a revised and more appropriate tactical philosophy, demonstrably became an exceptionally effective combat platform. While contemporary aerial warfare, in the era of advanced missile technology, might appear vastly different from the intense machine gun duels fought in 1943, the fundamental principles of physics governing these engagements have remained remarkably constant. A modern fighter, such as an F-15 Eagle or an F-35 Lightning II, continues to fundamentally convert potential energy, altitude, into kinetic energy, speed, and vice versa. These sophisticated aircraft still critically rely on their overall energy state, a combination of speed and altitude, to dictate the precise terms of an engagement and assert dominance. Furthermore, they continue to adeptly exploit powerful zoom climbs to effectively reset challenging tactical situations or gain a positional advantage. Although the primary offensive instruments have evolved from conventional bullets to highly sophisticated radar-guided missiles, the astute management of an aircraft's energy state remains the decisive factor in determining which pilot ultimately controls the flow and outcome of the aerial contest. Indeed, every fighter pilot undergoing training today is rigorously taught a core set of basic fighter maneuvers, BFM, that are direct descendants of the P-47's pioneering dive tactics. These include classic maneuvers like the high yo-yo, the low yo-yo, and the vertical scissors, all intricate applications of the very same energy management principles that Hub Zemke's courageous pilots painstakingly discovered and refined through arduous trial and error in the crucible of World War II combat. The compelling narrative of the P-47 Thunderbolt offers invaluable, broader insights into the intricate process of military adaptation and organizational change. It highlights a recurring tendency for established military organizations to naturally exhibit resistance to altering methods that have previously proven successful, even when the operational circumstances undergo significant transformation. For instance, the Army Air Force's pre-war tactical doctrine, having demonstrated effectiveness in controlled training exercises and limited small-scale conflicts, led senior commanders to presume its applicability and efficacy in the vastly different and more intense European theater. However, the harsh realities of early combat engagements quickly disproved this assumption. Yet a powerful institutional inertia often compelled many units to persist with demonstrably failed approaches for extended periods, sometimes months. Crucially, genuine and effective change frequently originated from astute, mid-level commanders, such as the exemplary Hub Zemke. These individuals possessed both the necessary authority to judiciously experiment with new tactics and the profound courage to decisively discard existing doctrine that was unequivocally costing the lives of their personnel. This observable pattern resonates throughout military history. Authentic tactical innovation and progress tend to emerge from those leaders who are sufficiently proximate to the realities of combat to accurately perceive what genuinely works, yet simultaneously hold enough seniority and influence within the hierarchy to effectively implement transformative changes. Beyond the immutable laws of physics and aerodynamics, the profound human element played an equally critical and often decisive role in the P-47's operational success. The pilots serving under Zemke's command placed immense trust in his judgment, a trust meticulously cultivated because he consistently prioritized and meticulously studied their chances of survival, rather than merely adhering to abstract theoretical constructs or rigid pre-established protocols. His tactical adjustments and innovations were invariably driven by the imperative to preserve the lives of his airmen, not by a desire to simply conform to the expectations or directives emanating from distant headquarters. This profound bond of trust was instrumental in enabling the rapid and effective implementation of methods that, at first glance, might have appeared counterintuitive to conventional fighter pilot instincts. Indeed, persuading seasoned fighter pilots to refrain from engaging in traditional dogfights, a core tenet of their training, demanded an unparalleled level of credibility. This credibility was not bestowed by rank alone, but was painstakingly earned through Zemke's consistent and unequivocally demonstrated concern for their well-being and ultimate survival. Thus, the specific style and approach of leadership proved to be an absolutely vital determinant in the successful evolution of combat doctrine. The enduring legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt permeates and profoundly influences every modern fighter doctrine that places a paramount emphasis on the judicious and skillful management of kinetic and potential energy. Its principles are indelibly etched into the fabric of every contemporary tactical manual that advocates for the strategic utilization of an aircraft's inherent strengths rather than foolishly attempting to engage an adversary on their preferred terms or in their chosen style of combat. More fundamentally, the P-47 story underpins the essential understanding that true victory in aerial engagements is not achieved by stubbornly attempting to force the immutable laws of physics to conform to preconceived or preferred tactics. Instead, triumph is realized through an intelligent and agile adaptation of one's tactics to harmoniously align with and exploit the inherent physical realities of flight and combat. This foundational insight, forged in the crucible of World War II, continues to shape the strategies and training of fighter pilots across the globe, ensuring the P-47's influence remains potent and relevant in the skies of today and tomorrow.